World War II, one of the biggest, greatest conflicts known to man. A war that spanned most of the globe and claimed the lives of millions. The Cold War, a competition between ideologies, with human existence hanging in the balance. These two wars combined lasted for most of the 20th century. World War II came first, with the Allied powers fighting the Nazis and the Japanese. After a hard struggle and the sacrifice of many soldiers and civilians, World War II came to an end in late 1945. However, just because World War II officially ended did not mean that the conflict was over. The actual violent fighting may have ceased, but disagreement and unrest remained. Two of the world's superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, would fight a war of ideology, each country attempting to spread their ideologies around the world. This conflict, though not directly violent, would soon be known as the Cold War and had direct links to the events that transpired as World War II was ending. To first understand the connection between World War II and the Cold War, it is important to first understand America's involvement in World War II. World War II officially began on September 3, 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded the neighboring country of Poland. Great Britain and France then declared war on Germany and the other Axis powers, including the Soviet Union, and fighting began. France was taken over by June of 1940. The Soviet Union would later be attacked by Nazi Germany, ending their agreement of not attacking each other. At this point, America wasn't actually officially fighting in the war. However, on December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and America declared war on Japan. Because they were allies with Japan, Germany also declared war on the United States. In order to effectively beat both the Nazis in Europe and Japan in Asia, America, Great Britain, and their new ally, the Soviet Union, agreed on a Germany-first strategy. The details of this strategy will be discussed in the next section, but long story short, the Allies decided to focus on fighting the Nazis first. The first area that the Americans fought in was Northern Africa. After fighting against the Germans in North Africa until 1943, the Allies successfully took that area over and set their sights on Sicily and Italy, which they also began to control in 1943. In 1944, the Allies finally began an attack on the European mainland, attacking Germany-held France by crossing the English Channel into Normandy, in which are called the D-Day landing. With America and Great Britain advancing from the west and the Soviets advancing from the east, the Allies eventually took over the capital of Germany, Berlin, in May of 1945. The Japanese would hold out until later that year, but the war in Europe was over, or so it seemed. The Germany First strategy was briefly mentioned in the section before this, but it's worth taking a closer look at the strategy now to understand it better. The National World War II Museum website describes some pieces to the strategy that affected the war and its outcome. This particular source talks about the first Washington Conference that took place in 1942. This conference was a meeting between FDR and Prime Minister Churchill. The two world leaders met on this occasion to discuss a possible strategy to attack Nazi Germany and Europe first before fully engaging Japan in the Pacific. This strategy was very unpopular among American citizens and military personnel alike, who wanted revenge against Japan for Pearl Harbor. However, FDR and Churchill concluded that because Russia and Britain were struggling to fight Germany in Europe, America should come to their aid first, instead of launching a full-out war against Japan. FDR realized that Britain and Russia would be necessary allies in the fight against Japan in the Pacific, and that if they were completely defeated by Germany in Europe, they wouldn't be able to help in the Pacific theater. However crazy and unpopular this plan sounded during the war, this particular strategy from FDR and Churchill seemed to pay off as the war rumbled on. World War II would officially end in 1945. However, the end of World War II introduced another war that would go on into the 1990s. The Cold War began right after World War II ended, and many of the causes behind the Cold War can be linked to how World War II ended and what progressed years after. In 1946 and 1947, there were two world superpowers. The United States and the Soviet Union both came out of World War II as strong nations, while much of the rest of the world was battered and weakened by the World War. These two countries, however, stood for completely opposite ideologies, leading to unrest. The United States was a capitalist nation, while the Soviet Union was a communist country. The Cold War, wasn't directly violent. However, because of the advent of nuclear weapons, tensions ran incredibly high between the US and the Soviet Union. In the aftermath of World War II, America took several different steps to try and stop the spread of communism. The policy of containment was created with the idea of keeping the Soviet Union from spreading communism. The Marshall Plan in 1948 gave rebuilding countries in Europe money to rebuild from war so that they wouldn't choose communism. In 1949, NATO was formed as a defense pact between countries who opposed the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, people believed in the domino theory, which was a theory that if one country were to follow communism, others would follow suit. This is why the United States fought in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, in order to attempt to keep communism from spreading to these particular countries. During the Cold War, America specifically focused on increasing its military presence across the globe. America believed that it needed to build military bases in Europe and the Pacific region in case of future attack. What was the reason America was frightened by the Soviet Union? During the Cold War, military intelligence wasn't as accurate as it is today. Therefore, in this time period, America didn't know what the Soviet military power was capable of. In order to stay up with what they thought the Soviet Union had, the U.S. would build up their military forces. However, this increase in the U.S. military would cause the Soviet Union to become worried and to build up their own military, keeping this vicious cycle of aggression going. One of the most notable and defining moments of the Cold War happened in the early stages of the ideological struggle. After World War II, Germany, as well as the devastated capital city of Berlin, was divided into two parts, an eastern section and a western section. America, Great Britain, and France were tasked with rebuilding Western Germany and West Berlin, while the Russians were to do the same with East Berlin. In 1948, however, the two sides stopped cooperating. On June 24th of 1948, the Soviets cut off the supply route from the Allied side of Berlin. In order to keep the 2 million citizens and military personnel stuck in West Berlin supplied, the U.S. and Britain flew in supplies in the biggest operation of its kind in history. These continuous airdrops went on until September 30th, 1949, after the Soviets had taken down their blockade. Because of the airlift, in which there were more than 278,000 individual airdrops, 2.3 million tons of supplies were delivered to West Berlin. This is just one of the significant examples of conflict between the United States and Russia. East and West Berlin would officially separate just weeks after the Berlin airlift was finished. Eventually, on August 12, 1961, the Soviet Union would actually build the Berlin Wall, separating the two areas and keeping people in East Berlin from defecting to West Berlin. As can be seen, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were extremely high during the years after the Cold War. The Cold War is honestly hard to fully discuss in a project like this. There's just so much that happened in the span of those 50 years. However, hopefully this presentation has explained the connection between how World War II ended and transformed into the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union both came out of World War II as superpowers, with completely different ideologies. These ideologies would clash for the next century, or half a century, as both countries fought to spread their ideas and limit the spread of the other. With the threat of nuclear warfare, both countries continued to globalize and fight each other for global power. Because the United States and the Soviet Union emerged from World War II as world superpowers with different ideologies, the stage was set for conflict. Here are the references that I used for this particular presentation in paper. And here's the slide crediting the makers of this slideshow template that I used. Thanks for watching.